Hi guys, Olive here today to bring you my November 2017 wrap-up, tell you what I'm currently reading, and tell you what's on my TBR for December. As I'm assuming you already know by now, November was Nonfiction November, which is a month-long reading initiative that I co-host annually with Gemma from Nonfic Books. During the month of November, we challenge all of BookTube to read more nonfiction than they already do. We got a tremendous response this year, which we were so incredibly happy to see. Because I was a co-host for this event, and because I love nonfiction so much, I read exclusively nonfiction during the month of November. I actually did quite a few review videos on the nonfiction books that I read throughout the month of November, so we will start off by talking about the nonfiction that I have not yet talked about. Starting with Blood, Bones, and Butter, The Inadvertent Education of a Reluctant Chef by Gabrielle Hamilton. This is a food memoir written by the chef owner of the long-running New York City restaurant Prune. It is a short yet heartful memoir that discusses Gabrielle Hamilton's growing up with her French mother, who was always in an apron, always seemed to be cooking something. The book then moves on to her early teenage years, during which her parents divorced and she was basically left to fend for herself. Needing to find a way to support herself, she got jobs in restaurants in both the front and back of house. After a misguided experience when she was working as a waitress, when she began to steal from the establishment that she was working at, she sticks to the back of the house and eventually becomes a self-taught line cook, working everywhere from restaurants to catering companies, even a kids' summer camp. After years spent in the kitchen, Hamilton began to feel that she was doing herself a disservice by limiting her future options of careers. She had stumbled into the food industry and was worried that she had ended up there by mistake and that maybe it wasn't really right for her. Because of these feelings, she ended up going to get her MFA from the University of Michigan. However, when she was going through the program, she felt very isolated and out of place, and once again felt herself being drawn back into the food industry. But I'll tell you what, that MFA was definitely not a waste of time because Homegirl can write. This is a deep and deceptively simple work that has subtle layers just like a delicious croissant. I was absolutely enveloped by this memoir, and I came out of it feeling that I truly knew her as a person. Most of the criticisms that I've seen of this book seem to be surrounding the fact that Gabrielle Hamilton is not always the most likable person. I find criticisms like that irritating because there are going to be plenty of people in this world who you don't like, who don't like you. But that doesn't mean that hearing about their experiences is any less valuable. Just because you don't think you and that person would be friends in real life doesn't mean there's no beauty in their experience. It doesn't mean there's nothing to be learned from their experience. And certainly Gabrielle Hamilton went through an extremely rough time in a loveless marriage to an Italian man, where looking for affection from him was like looking for water in a dry well. But in her raw, emotional honesty in this book, you see the strength that she built up. You see her blossom in this book into a loving, devoted mother, into the owner and operator of her own establishment. She went from carrying out orders to giving them. So like her or not, she certainly earns your respect in this memoir. Highly recommend. Another book that I read in November was How Music Got Free, The End of an Industry, The Turn of the Century, and the Patient Zero of Piracy by Stephen Richard Witt. This was a surprisingly riveting tale of digital music piracy in the late 1990s and early 2000s. This book interweaves several different stories, all connected by the advent of digital music. And indeed, that's where this book begins, with the invention of the MP3 file. We learn what the MP3 file actually is, who created it, how it works, and how it almost didn't win the format war. From there, we start to hear the stories of many different people connected with either the music industry or with online piracy. We hear the story of innovative record executive Doug Morris, who cornered the market on the hip-hop industry, which is the type of music we hear the most about in this book because of the relevant actors in the stories. We also hear about the earliest online pirates in the infancy of the internet, and how they got their material, which leads us to the core story of this book. That is the story of Del Glover, who was a factory worker at a compact disc manufacturing plant in North Carolina, who leaked nearly 2,000 albums over the course of a decade. So basically, this book talks about the music industry, the internet, and the relationship between those two entities over a 10-year period of time. While that may not sound like the most engaging book that you've ever read, my God, is the storytelling top-notch in this book. I also felt very personally connected to this story because during this time period, I was in middle school and early high school, and I was super into the popular music of the time. So every album, every single that this book talked about, I had heard and was really into at the time. This book also discussed a campaign that was launched by the record companies to crack down on anyone who was downloading music illegally. It tended to focus on everyday people, just people off the street who may or may not have known what they were doing. As such, it was a PR nightmare for the record labels, but one of my teachers from middle school was actually one of the people who was targeted by this campaign. I am perfectly willing to admit that the personal connection that I feel toward this story may make me biased, but I thought this was a super engaging, entertaining read. And the last book I read this month that I have not yet discussed elsewhere is Catch Me If You Can, The True Story of a Real Fake by Frank W. Abagnale, ghostwritten by Stan Redding. This book tells the true story of Frank W. Abagnale, who was a con man during the 1960s. Over a roughly 10-year period of time, he posed as a co-pilot, as a pediatrician, and as a lawyer. He flew millions of miles for free and cashed millions of dollars worth of bad checks worldwide, all because he was such a good con man. You also may know that his story was turned into a Steven Spielberg movie in the early 2000s starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks. I had watched and enjoyed the movie many years ago, and for some reason I had it on the brain, hence why I felt the urge to pick this book up finally. I'll say that the book was fun, but I do have a lower opinion of it than I would have if I had not been watching interviews with Frank Abagnale on YouTube lately. Frank Abagnale now works as a security expert for the FBI. He was released from prison early in agreement with the government that he would go to work for the FBI for a specified period of time so as to fulfill the rest of his sentence. He still works there years upon years after his obligation to do so is over, but he has given many interviews over the years, not just about the field in which he works, but also about his life story. Some of the interviews that I've seen with him and some of the talks that I've seen him give seem to contradict a lot of what I read in the book. There have been a lot of criticisms of the book saying that it is not entirely accurate, and Frank Abagnale has all but confirmed those rumors by saying that the ghostwriter was hired to tell a story. So this book was less of a nonfiction pick than I originally intended it to be, but I did go back and rewatch the movie as well. I found it very entertaining and more or less faithful to the story. So if you were interested in this book or the movie, know that both are very entertaining, but they are both definitely embellished. All the remaining 6 books that I read for Nonfiction November are books that I have discussed in other videos, but I will give you a brief overview of each and where you can hear me talk about them. The first of those being The Water Book by Alec Jha. This is a scientific exploration of the vital substance of water that is told alongside the author's own story of his first trip to Antarctica. I had mixed feelings about this book, and I talked about them in a tipsy review for this book, so I will link that down below if you would like to watch it. I also read The Outrun by Amy Liptrot, which is her memoir about her healing process after becoming addicted to alcohol. Amy Liptrot regroups and finds peace after returning to her childhood home of Orkney, Scotland. This is a moving and highly enjoyable read. I also read I Contain Multitudes, The Microbes Within Us, and a Grander View of Life by Ed Yong. This is another science book that discusses the evolution and function of microbes, or microorganisms that live in and around every living thing on Earth. It is a highly engaging read, and I discussed both it and The Outrun in a dual nonfiction review for the challenge word home. I will link that down below if you'd like to watch. I also read The Lion in the Living Room, How House Cats Tamed Us and Took Over the World by Abigail Tucker. This is a book that questions the human love for cats, given their general uselessness and high potential for harm in the environments that we've introduced them to. This is a must-read for cat lovers. Additionally, I read A Matter of Breeding, A Biting History of Pedigree Dogs and How the Quest for Status Has Harmed Man's Best Friend by Michael Brandow. This is an examination of how the concept of a pure breed dog serves our own aesthetic interests over the health of the animals that we love so much. It is an informative book, but one that goes off the rails toward the middle. I discussed both A Matter of Breeding and The Lion in the Living Room in another dual nonfiction review, and I will link that down below if you would like to watch. And the last book that I read for Nonfiction November was Bird Mania, A Remarkable Passion for Birds by Bernd Brunner. This is an incredibly visual book full of gorgeous illustrations and photographs, and it also contains well-researched stories of both well-known and obscure individuals who all have an obsession with birds in one way or another. I did a somewhat unique review of this book in that it contained a vlog component of me going to hear this author give a lecture on this book. So if you would like to hear more about this book or would like to see me try something new with my reviews, I will link that down below for you to watch it. Now moving on to what I am currently reading. Unfortunately, at the end of the month, I ran a little bit short on time. I was focusing all my energies into getting out reviews for the nonfiction books that I was reading throughout the month. So I am still currently reading 3 nonfiction books that I'm hoping to finish up here soon. The first of those being How to Listen to Jazz by Ted Gioia, which I am really enjoying so far. The next being Opium, Reality's Dark Dream by Thomas Dormandy, which I am not that far into, but is very interesting so far. And the last being the audiobook that I am currently listening to called The Attention Merchants, The Epic Scramble to Get Inside Our Heads by Tim Wu. I am about halfway done with this one and it is excellent. And lastly, I would like to tell you about all the books that I am hoping to read in December, the first of those being Cork Dork, a wine-fueled adventure among the obsessive sommeliers, big bottle hunters, and the rogue scientists who taught me to live for taste by Bianca Bosker. I'm going to be buddy reading this one with Becky from Beck's Books, and I cannot wait to get started. Next, I would like to read Ghost Written by David Mitchell. I've actually never read any David Mitchell before. This will be the first book of his that I ever pick up, and I have a sneaking suspicion I'm going to love it. I would also like to read The Night Watch by Sarah Waters. I am slowly working my way through Sarah Waters' bibliography, and I'm saving her most well-known, most well-loved books for last. Although I don't hear this book talked about as much on BookTube as, say, Fingersmith, I am still positive that it is going to be fantastic. I am also finally going to get around to reading The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. I have heard many people speak highly of this book, and I've had several BookTube friends get on my case that I've not read this one yet, so I'm finally picking it up. And I would like to reread The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern, which is one of my favorite books of all time. I've been meaning to reread this one for a really long time and just haven't gotten around to it. But I just saw Erin Morgenstern tweet that she is editing her new novel. So I need to give this one a reread and get myself properly hyped for her new book. And the only thing left to do is pick the random book off of my TBR for the month. If you've never seen me do this, what I do is I pick 3 different options off of my to-read shelf on Goodreads, and I select one of those to read for the month. I like the first pick. Where is it? There it is. The first pick was right behind me. That is Sea of Poppies by Amitav Ghosh. The next option is one of the few books on birds that I do not yet own called Bird Sense: What It's Like to Be a Bird by Tim Burkhead. And the third option is another one that I owned called The Circus in Winter by Kathy Day. Though I am very tempted to choose this one because it is seasonally appropriate, I am already rereading The Night Circus this month, so I think that's enough books about circuses for 1 month. So instead, my random pick for the month will be Sea of Poppies by Amitav Ghosh. So those were all of the books that I read during Nonfiction November, what I am currently reading, and what I am planning to read in December. If you've read any of these books, if you've heard about any of them, or if you're interested in reading them now that you've heard me talk about them, I would love to hear from you in the comment section below, or you can find me on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles are linked in the description box below. I would like to give a big thank you to everyone who participated in Nonfiction November. You guys made it so much fun this year, and thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you in the next one. Bye.